Welcome to Scoop and Scale, where we dish up the science and weigh the facts about mostly equine nutrition. I'm Jill Jackson, lifelong equestrian, podcast producer, and pony owner. I'm a dressage rider and at-home horse keeper, living the challenge of managing easy keepers on multiple acres of pasture.
And I'm equine nutrition consultant, Dr. Claire Tunis of Clarity Equine Nutrition. I develop diet plans for horses ranging from metabolic seniors to Olympic athletes. I also consult for equine nutrition companies. I'm a scientist, dressage rider, and pony club mom.
Claire and I have been horse friends for almost 20 years, and like all good horse friends, we're always talking horses. We talk about the challenges of managing our horses, our riding struggles, feeding horses, and what's going on in the wider equine community. This podcast is a place for us to have conversations mostly about equine nutrition. It's for anyone who wants to make better choices when it comes to feeding their horses.
And before we get started, a quick disclaimer. The information in this podcast is general and not meant to replace the individualized advice of your own qualified equine nutritionist or veterinarian. And while I have a PhD in nutrition, I'm not a veterinarian and can't give medical advice.
With that, thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the following episode. Before we begin, we'd like to let you know that this episode includes discussions about emergency evacuations, natural disasters, and the challenges of moving livestock during a crisis. While our goal is to provide practical information to help horse owners prepare, some of the experiences shared may be difficult or emotional for listeners who have lived through similar events. Please take care while listening. If this topic feels overwhelming, it's okay to pause, skip this episode, or come back to it when you're ready.
In our last episode, we talked about what horse owners need to consider and put in place before a natural disaster. Preparation is essential, but even with a solid plan, it can be hard to imagine what an evacuation will actually feel like when a disaster is unfolding around you. Today, we thought we would walk through an evacuation scenario and what it might look like. And joining us to share her firsthand experience is my good friend, Amy Hausmann. Amy and I met when she was doing her master's degree in equine nutrition at California State University, Fresno, where she was studying insulin resistance. And after that, she did a brief stint as a dairy nutritionist prior to entering academia, where she was until recently faculty at a junior college, teaching all areas of equine management. Today, she works as a formulations manager for a company that makes vitamin and mineral premixes, predominantly for the dairy industry in California. Amy's a lifelong horse owner who spent much of her life living in Santa Rosa in Sonoma County, which is where she was living in 2017 when she found herself caught up in the Tubbs fire, which I believe at the time was the largest wildfire to be recorded in California history. Amy, welcome to Scoop and Scale.
Thanks, Claire. I'm so excited to be here.
It's great to have you. So before we kind of get going, I just wanted to share with our listeners that I do write an outline for our episodes, and typically they take about an hour or so to put together. This episode and the last one have, as I think about it, they're probably the hardest ones that I've written since we've been doing this. And I realized the reason for that is that I've been trying to put together an outline and create sort of a story out of something that I really don't know very much about. And, I consider myself to be a smart person, and I figured that it wouldn't be that hard. And that by association, I do know a fair bit about disaster planning. I did live in Northern California in 2017 when we were having a lot of those big fires, and did know people like Amy who was impacted. So I had their stories. But when I came down to it, I realized I was actually woefully unprepared to write this episode, which I think is sort of an interesting parallel to the reality of what it would be like if I were actually caught up facing an evacuation without proper planning and without proper, background information. So it's actually been a really eye-opening and interesting experience putting these together. So while we're going to be using wildfire as our primary example today because of Amy's and Jill's firsthand experience with those, and because wildfire is one of the fastest moving and least forgiving natural disaster scenarios for horse owners, what we cover does apply to other rapid onset disasters as well, especially flash flooding and potentially hurricanes and tornadoes. So the principles are the same, even when the hazard looks different.
That's really true. A flash flood in a river valley can move just as fast as fire in dry grass. An approaching hurricane gives you more lead time, but the lead time disappears if you wait too long to act. Amy, before we talk about how evacuations work, could you share with our listeners a brief overview of what your involvement was in the Tubbs fire and what made that fire so dangerous?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest thing about Tubbs, we had not had a fire of that magnitude in our county really ever, and it started at night, and so we didn't have any warning that it was coming. We didn't know to be prepared. Most people were sleeping, and we didn't have a good evacuation system in place, meaning Nixle now is relatively well accepted. But at that time, Nixle only sent alerts to you if you were in the zip code of the area that was impacted. And many people were not in the initial zip codes where the fire started, if they were even signed up. So many people weren't even aware that the Nixle system exists. So the winds were about 70 to 90 miles per hour that night. Most people were not alerted that it was happening. People like my parents maybe got a phone call that told them to evacuate if the landlines were still up at that point. So many people only knew that they needed to evacuate because their neighbors were banging on their doors and telling them they needed to get out. One of the other struggles of the Tubbs fire was that same night, the Nuns fire started in eastern Santa Rosa. So on the northeast corner of Santa Rosa, we have the Tubbs fire coming through. On the southeast corner, we have the Nuns fire. That fire ended up being, I think, 51,000 acres. And then about the same time, the Atlas fire started in Napa, and it ended up being about 56,000 acres. So not only did we not have a good communication system, all of our fire resources were really stretched very thin. So starting the next morning, people started messaging across Facebook. We have horses at the fairgrounds. We need help. And so it kind of just felt like I have to go do something. And the fairgrounds is just down the street from my house. So I just kind of showed up ready to do whatever needed to be there. And my horse veterinarian was there. And I was the first person I think she knew who showed up. And I just kind of went to work as her vet tech. And that role evolved over time just because nobody knew what to do, So we ended up opening multiple evacuation shelters. I went on some evacuation runs. Really, we were just totally unprepared that this could ever happen to us.
Yeah, the speed that wildfire can spread is something I don't think people truly understand until they're in it. And the same is true for flooding. Like a creek that looks manageable at noon can be over the road, in a couple hours. It just happens so fast.
Yeah, I mean, the Tubbs fire jumped 6 lanes of the 101 freeway. And so Anybody who had thought, that could have stopped it, it didn't. It burned down our Kmart, it hit a neighborhood, and it kept going. So really, especially with that wind power, you really don't know how fast, you don't understand, I think, how fast it can move.
Right.
I remember living in Sacramento at that time, and for me, as an outsider looking in, there was sort of like this, to your point, oh my gosh, Kmart burned down. I mean, that's in town. Like that's not, fires don't happen. Like the fires, in my experience living in Northern Colorado at that time, fires happened like in the foothills, right? They were things that happened in the middle of nowhere. Like it was like mind blowing that this was a major sort of urban, suburban area that was being hit by fire. And that was new to me. In that moment. And so prior to the Tubbs fire, what was your personal experience with natural disasters in your area?
Yeah, I grew up on the west side of Sonoma County off the Russian River, and we're very flood prone, particularly, between late 90s, early 2000s. I always joke that as like a school kid, you had your natural disaster day in the Central Valley. They have fog days and they run on different bus schedules based on when the fog lifts. For us, it was flood days. We would hit a certain amount of rain, all the roads would start shutting down, and we knew that we didn't have school. You knew the power was going to go out. My parents have a Coleman stove. We would stay in the house for a week with no power. And the barns I rode at and worked at were all in West County. So we just knew, when the river hits this many feet, we have to go. The fairgrounds open. You take all your horses. You don't ask any questions. You pack your hay. For us, it wasn't flash flooding, right? It was like, yeah, it's going to rain like this week. We're probably going to have to go. We got this many horses, take this much hay. and we go. But the idea that we could ever really catch on fire, never occurred to us. And it is interesting because when I moved back here in 2015, I went to some of those same barns I trained at as a kid and talked to them about boarding and said, what's your evacuation plan? And we were in the middle of the drought and people were saying, oh, we don't evacuate here. That never happens. And I was thinking, go look at the barn. You'll see the flood level. Go look at your house. There's a flood line in your house.
A mark on it.
So, we knew. We just went to the fairgrounds. Our fairgrounds, has racehorse stalls. And that's just where we lived for a week or two until the waters went down and we would go back, So I would say it was a much slower moving natural disaster than this sort of thing that just occurred really overnight and affected so many people.
So it sounds like people in the area understood how to evacuate, maybe not so fast, with the flooding, but at least you guys had a plan. You knew where you were going. People had done it before.
Yeah. And actually, probably the interesting part about that is that West County understood how to evacuate and the fires hit East County. And so the east side of the county was kind of like, all those river people, that's their problem, right? Houses fall in the river. And on the east side, it's the drier side of the county. So maybe you got some road closures, but it's typically hillier, more oak, based area that doesn't have the low-lying valleys. The river doesn't run through that side of the county. So I do think there was the other part of it was that unless you grew up in West County, you hadn't really experienced evacuations to that extent.
That's really interesting. Yeah. And it's interesting your comment about how because of the drought, there hadn't been flooding in a long time and how quickly we forget. Right. I think that's a very human, a human trait. We're very quick to forget these things. But so let's get into what it might look like, especially in an area with fires and flooding, which can, as we've said, can happen so quickly. Like, how am I? So I'm going to put myself in the position of this sort of, because it's a reality as a person here that doesn't really know how this works. Right. So how am I going to know that there's a risk? I mean, like you mentioned, your parents getting a phone call, but I mean, there might be a vague mention on the news that like we're expecting a week of heavy rainfall or something, right? Or red flag warnings are issued. But how am I going to know that I'm personally at risk?
So in the last episode, we discussed registering with your county emergency department. You can sign up for text alerts through them. And then through Watch Duty, the app, when you sign up for that, you can select your county or whatever other counties you want to be notified for. When you select for notifications, as soon as there is any type of fire that is started, when Watch Duty updates, it will automatically send a notification to your phone. And then when you go to that fire, you can turn on notifications for this incident, and you will get every notification for that specific fire.
That's a good reminder for me. I'm somebody that whenever I put an app on my phone and it says, do you want notifications? I say no. Right. So it's probably important with this particular one that you say yes. So I'm going to get a notification and it's going to tell me I need to get out.
Well, it may not specifically say that you need to get out. There are 3 different alert levels that are worth understanding, and they're explained pretty much as ready, set, go. But when you have horses, level 1, which is ready, that's your only concern. So level 1, ready, means it's time to prepare. So review your emergency plan and your evacuation routes. And like if you have horses, if you have livestock, this is when you have to start loading the trailer and get moving. Things may not go as planned. It's going to be more stressful in this situation. And as soon as you're in evacuation level 1, just start going. Disasters can go from level 1 to level 3 in no time. And you do not want to wait until the roads are clogged up and the disaster is on top of you. Level 2, which is set, and this is yellow. And the reason I'm telling you the colors is because in the Watch Duty app, when you get the notifications, they're going to come up in this color coding. And you'll be able to see, I mean, I think that it's helpful to look at it and be like, if it's red, it's time to go. We're going to get to that one. But what yellow means, or level 2, is there's a significant danger in your area. So you should either leave the area now or prepare to leave at a moment's notice. And under level 2, the threat is less predictable and the conditions are going to deteriorate rapidly. Level 3, which is go now. This is the last notice that you're going to receive. So if you choose to ignore the evacuation notice, emergency personnel may not be able to assist you any further. And at this point, if you haven't left with your horses are going to be left. Like you've passed the chance. So you've got to move on to just turning them loose or figuring out a way for them to shelter in place. And again, if you have signed up for the Watch Duty app and you've turned the notifications on, you'll receive the notification of fire or flooding for your specific county.
So for new horse owners, I'm assuming that the recommendation, like you said, it's like move on level 1, right?
Yeah, 100%. By the time an order is in effect, the threat is very real. The roads may already be starting to get congested or partially cut off. And your exit routes at that point are going to start to become more limited. Loading horses takes time. And even with a great plan, like 20 minutes is optimistic if things go smoothly. You need as much time and as much buffer as possible. And this is true whether you're watching a fire on the ridge or, looking at a flood and gauging the water rising in a nearby river, or a hurricane that's tracked towards you.
In your last episode, you talked about being ready to go early, having a buddy to go to. And, my recommendation is always, if you feel uncomfortable, just go. You don't have to wait for the evacuation system to tell you to go. If you think something is happening, just move. If you have somewhere you can go, and every fire I've been lucky that it has not gotten to our barn, but because I have elderly parents who often end up evacuated to my house because of my connection as a teacher, I often have students call me for help. And so I just moved my horse preemptively to a friend's dairy, and they have hay. She's got kids. She already has horses. What's one more mouth to feed? And it just makes my life so much easier, right? Like, that part is done. I can do whatever else needs to be done and not worry about it. And I will say part of this probably comes from, in the Tubbs fire, it was probably the first time in my adult life that I turned my phone off. And I was totally asleep. I slept through. Unfortunately, I live downtown. It wasn't a super affected area. I woke up a couple times in the night, probably heard propane tanks exploding, thought, it's been a wild night for car accidents. And when I woke up in the morning and turned on my phone at 5:30, the text messages that started coming in said, I hope you're okay. Please respond. Gabby's ex-husband's house burned down. You must be devastated. And I was like, I don't know why Gabby's husband affects me. It just was so weird that, even without checking the internet, I just walked outside the house and the entire horizon was on fire. And while I was standing on my porch in my pajamas, I got a text message from an hour earlier from the barn that said, we're evacuating the barn. Please let me know what you want to do. And I went in the house, put my shoes on, and started running down the street. And so, to me, it's, if you're going out of town and things are looking a little shaky, just move. There's no shame in, being the nervous Nelly who was like, I would like to move my horse to the coast or whatever the safer space is, before the bad things actually start happening.
Yeah, that's such good advice. I think we all get those gut instincts, but I also think that it's interesting. Several months ago, I took a self-defense course, which was taught by somebody who'd been in the military and in the police force here, and he'd grown up in Africa. And he made a really interesting point that growing up in that environment, right, where the threat of death from apex predators, insects, everything, it makes you extremely vigilant. He's like, people who grow up there are just, I suspect the same as in the outback of Australia, right? There are so many things there that can kill you, that you just are extremely vigilant. And he made the point that, we're very fortunate in the United States and likely much of the Western world, right, that we don't really have to be very vigilant anymore. We spend all our time walking down the sidewalk, sending text messages and reading things on our phones. We're just not very aware anymore. And I think that we sometimes have lost a little bit that we don't trust our gut instinct anymore, right? We're not super aware of what's going on. We don't, the news just brushes over the top of you, right? The weather forecast that, we're having monumental rain and, whatever. It's we don't suddenly go, oh, wow, that means we might actually be in a 100-year flood situation. Or they say it, but you don't think about what that might really mean to you. And we often get little tidbits of things that we just ignore, right? And so
I was going to say, like, I think Amy can probably agree with me on this. Once you've been through a fire, I mean, when I went outside in Colorado, and even for probably 2 years after I moved to Iowa, if you smell smoke in the air, if you see smoke, I mean, you are in a full-blown PTSD panic and like looking for everything. It doesn't matter. And then if you can't see smoke and you can smell smoke, that's also another panic, right? But that what you're saying, Claire, like it's just you become very vigilant once you've been through one of these natural disasters.
And most of us just are not, thankfully are not, but it actually works against us too.
Right. And I think, interestingly, to Claire's point earlier, my sister has horses. She lives in Salinas. By the time they had a fire in Salinas, we'd been at least through 2 fires here. And they had a fire above their barn. And she's calling me and she's like, when do you think I should evacuate? And I said, now. And she said, well, my trainer thinks. And I said, I don't care what your trainer thinks. I don't care. You see a fire from your barn, you go get your horse right now. You have a trailer, you go get her, you take whoever's horse wants to go with yours and you leave. And, it was just this really interesting, we had talked about this. She had seen what I had gone through. She had heard what I had been through, evacuating horses in front of fires, what we'd seen at the fairgrounds. But living it and hearing about it are 2 very different things. And yeah, for us, if we get east blowing winds here, it starts being I should cancel my plans and stay home, because most of our wind comes off the ocean. And when it comes from the east, our neighbors Napa like to send us their fires. So, I want to be home and ready to go.
Yeah, for sure.
So
yeah, in Colorado, go ahead.
I was to say, and I think, it is. It's knowing what your warnings are. At the school farm where I used to teach, we were surrounded by the Russian River. And my coworkers would be like, I can't believe we have to go teach today. The river is rising. And I'd look at the river report and say, oh, the river's at 20 feet. We don't close the roads until 32 feet. It's like nothing. It's probably another week. But I knew it because I grew up there. And, knowing what that red flag warning is, knowing what your flood stages are that are going to close the roads, because it's really important information on when to put yourself on high alert and when to stay home and when to stay close to the barn, have your trailer hitched, have your go bag ready. And if you're not home, tell somebody, hey, I'm not home. Can you be responsible for my animals?
That actually is a really good point. I would throw that out there, regardless of disaster planning. If you leave the area, especially if you board, this happened to me when I was helping manage a boarding facility. We had a horse, had some very weird behavior. The owner was in Florida. I couldn't get hold of them. And I realized, oh my gosh, we don't have any permissions. I have no written permission from any of the owners in this facility of what I'm allowed to do with their horse if something happens and they're not here. So it's the beginning of summer now. People are going on vacation. If you're going on vacation and your horse is boarded, please make sure that your barn owner knows and your veterinarian knows what you're willing to have them do to your horse, for your horse, if an emergency happens, colic, anything, right? I think that's a really important point, to your point, Amy, and it's not specific to disaster planning. This is just goes horse ownership. If you're going out of town, you board, so your horse is just taken care of, they need to know, are you willing to pay for colic surgery? If your horse has to have colic, who's giving that permission if they can't reach you?
Yeah.
Right? The person I needed to reach was on an airplane.
Yeah, and
I also think that's... Go ahead.
Speaking from experience, there is no, worse feeling than turning on your phone and realizing I may have missed the opportunity to save my horse. And unfortunately, it's not what happened to me, but it was terrifying. You're running through so many what if situations and really having that person who they can call who knows what you want is really valuable.
Yeah, and I think to speak to the red flag warnings really quickly, I think that's really important that people listen to the red flag warnings and really pay attention when those get issued. On the Watch Duty app, they do put the red flag warning. It's inlaid over top of the area so you can see them when they're issued. And as I said last time, you can turn the wind function on and it'll show you the wind direction and the speed so that you can actually see if the fire is currently coming in your direction. That doesn't mean the winds won't change, but it really is nice to have that turned on so you can see which way the fire is going. And in Colorado, we had our trailer, we didn't go to bed. The trailers were hooked up. From May to November, the trailers were just hooked up. And I never went to bed without it hooked up. In a flood-prone area, the equivalent might be keeping it hitched whenever there's a multi-day rain event or, warm weather where there's snow melt or something that's going to cause the streams to, or the rivers to increase quickly.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So going back to our, sort of scenario, I've received my notification, right, that there's, an evacuation or ideally a pre-evacuation, and I'm what's the first thing I'm going to do?
So when you get that evacuation notice, the first one, there's a lot of really good information in there. And it's really important that you take the time before you jump into action to read what it is telling you. It's going to already tell you where the fire is, what the evacuation area is. So depending on, if you're in a neighborhood or if you're just in a small town, it's either going to give you a miles around a certain point or it's going to say from this area to this area. It's going to tell you what roads are already closed. It's going to give you any of that pertinent information. So I would say definitely take the time to read the evacuation notice and understand, because there's nothing worse if you jump in the truck and trailer and the road's closed, right? So you need to stay on top of reading that to make sure that you are getting out as safely as possible.
Yeah, so last time we talked about having a plan, right, and having a route, and I think that's a really important point you raised, that maybe your route's already, you can't take the route you had planned because maybe that road's already closed. So looking at that, blindly following your plan is not going to be helpful if there's information out there that maybe the flood's washed out that road already or what have you.
That's something we saw in 2017. We didn't have these alert systems. And so by the time I got to the barn, the people who had evacuated had all gone sat on the highway for 30, 45 minutes and then just came back to the barn because they were like, well, it seems safer to come back here than it does to stay sitting on the road. And I think now there is so much more information about, everybody saw it was the hills are on fire, go to the coast. There was no clear strategy of how we got out. So every west going road was just packed with people. And then the fire equipment and everything can't get through either. So I think now we have so much better information about how to get places.
And speaking of the roads really quickly, I think this is something, unless you've done this, you don't know, is that when people are evacuating, the roads are not both lanes. They a lot of times will close the road so all of the traffic can only go out of the area. So if you're trying to get in or your friend's coming in with a trailer to help you, they may not be able to get to you because of that traffic. So that's something else to consider. Normally it's not going to be in the updates, but you need to find out where you're going to meet your friend, and you may be walking your horse out to meet them somewhere outside of the area. So that is something else. We didn't talk about that in the last episode, but it is something to think about, that there's normally a staging area that will get set up for trailers, and you're going to have to figure out how to get your horses to that point.
That's a really good idea. And I think if you've seen, there have definitely been heroic videos, right, that make it onto social media of people riding horses out to staging areas and what have you. But I think that's a really good point about the roads not being two-way. Because I think that's just an assumption that what we're used to is roads going both directions, right? So I think that's a really good point. So I've read the plan, right? So I've read the alert. I know where I can and can't go. I've got my plan, and I've decided that I need to evacuate. So what's next?
So you're going to call your evacuation partner. This is the buddy system that we talked about in the last episode. Your first call should be to the person who's going to have your back. Maybe you guys are sharing a trailer. Maybe, you have 4 horses and 2 of your horses have to go with them. They may not have got the alert. It could be in the middle of the night. They could be sleeping. So, you want to make that phone call, make sure they're awake, make sure they know. And then you're going to confirm that you guys are both moving and, follow the plan that you already put into place.
And, along those lines, in 2019, when we had our Kincaid fire, we, again, despite everything that happened in 2017, just couldn't have imagined that we would do the same thing again. So 2019, there's a fire. We close school. It's to the north of Sonoma County. And I'm going to Fresno and call my friend, say, hey, I'm going out of town. Can you get my horse if you need her, if she needs to go? I tell my parents and I tell a good friend of mine, hey, I can't imagine that you'll both have to evacuate at the same time because geographically there are very different areas, but I left the key under the mat. Go to my house if you need to go. If anything happens in Santa Rosa, please go get my cat. And the fire department decided, in order to avoid what happened in Tubbs, which was that several people died and things happened overnight, they decided to evacuate essentially a third of the county. So they told everybody up to go. And in order to motivate people, they then shut off the power and your gas. So people had to leave. And I had gone to Fresno and I was staying at a friend's house. And about 2 a.m., people start calling. And, one was a friend who had a boarding barn. And she said, hey, I need you to come get some horses. And I said, I'm in Fresno. And then I had a former student call.
Amy, for listeners, how far away is Fresno from Santa Rosa?
It's about 5 hours.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not like a simple, I'm just going to hop back. And that's, I will say I made it back in about 3 because there was no traffic going in the home direction and I would panic. By the time one of my former students called me, I woke my friend up and I said, I have to go. She handed me a case of water and said, let me know how it turns out. And so I just drove home. And by the time I got home, I was like I said, the only one heading into the county. The road 101 south was entirely stopped. And the gas stations in those areas were actually out of gas. So there's another thing that you may not even think about, these areas where everybody's evacuating through. During fire season, going to sleep with a full tank of gas is how I sleep through the night. You don't want to have to stop and get your trailer or get gas for your truck. And I usually drive my Honda. So I had to go home, get my truck, go pick up my trailer. And it's difficult. For us, October is fire season. Do you just not go anywhere in October? Because it's difficult. If you're somebody's buddy, you should be home.
Yeah. So that was it. When you realized that you had these people relying on you, right? I mean, that's why.
Yeah. And we hadn't I think that's the other piece, right? We hadn't had this conversation of, hey, I need you to be my buddy, right? I called my buddy. Nobody had called me and said, hey, I need to if I need to evacuate, will you be available? I think also as a teacher, you're kind of, people, there's this expectation you help the community, right? So I had so many people who were like, oh, just call Amy. She always shows up. And I had not fully thought that through of, things are on fire. I'm fine. I'm going to go.
Yeah, I think communication during an active disaster is pretty chaotic. Like the cell towers can go down and fires and, hurricanes. There's lots of ways that can happen. Text is definitely more reliable than voice calls, especially a lot of times fires can be loud. The activity can be loud. So if you're trying to call them, they're probably not going to hear it anyway. So I always recommend sending the text. If you can't reach the person by phone, if you try calling them, then text them. And if you have a plan already established in advance, you don't need some lengthy conversation. Just say, wildfire, evacuation warning in place, leaving now, and then where you're going, and send it. I think the number one thing that we see, because I manage the Facebook group, is people that want help, and they will put up a post, because that's the only post we allow is somebody that actually needs help evacuating. And they will say, I'm in Boulder, Colorado. I have 6 horses. I need trailers. They don't give an address. They don't give a phone number. If you're going to ask for help, at least give a phone number and let somebody text you. There's nothing more frustrating than 10 people saying, we can come now. What is your address? What is your phone number? Because once you put that message up, you're not going to look at Facebook again. You're going to be too consumed. So it's really important that if you are asking for help, at least put your phone number up. If you can put your address and your phone number, that's even better.
Yes, what I'm hearing is that, both parties and your community, right, knowing the pre-established plan is going to do a lot of the work for you in that moment when, when it's chaotic and communication is chaotic and you're panicked and adrenaline's high. It cuts down a lot of that chaotic communication that would otherwise happen, right? So being able to follow that actionable plan, knowing that you have a friend who knows the plan and has your back, really will likely go a long way to helping kind of ease some of that panic that we would, otherwise be feeling. And that it's totally natural to feel.
Yeah, it's, also in Tubbs, the cell towers burned. So we didn't have as much ability to communicate. So, that first night or first morning, I'm driving to the barn and I'm trying to call people and the phone's just dead. It's not going through. I ended up calling a friend of mine who lives out by my parents, and I was supposed to go out there for a field trip with the class. And I said, hey, I don't think we're going to make it for the field trip today. I think I have to go evacuate my horse. And he said, Amy, we're trying to evacuate the dairy right now. And in that moment, I just couldn't possibly understand what was happening, because that is the west side of Santa Rosa, and I am on the southeast corner of Santa Rosa. How is everything on fire? And so you're listening to the radio, and there was out of area reporters there. They said Coddingtown Mall had burned down. They meant Kmart. But, even you can't rely on the radio as necessarily providing the most accurate information. And when you can't get a hold of anybody, we're so used to just having instant access to information that creates its own kind of panic. Think about when you put your phone somewhere and you don't look at it for an hour, the feeling you have that panic on top of, I don't know what's happening and I can't get a hold of anyone.
Yeah. So again, having that plan in place and having that hope, right? That someone will just work the plan, even though you haven't contacted them, would really give you some hope in that situation. But so we're going to start working that plan, right? We're going to start loading horses. We've decided we're evacuating, so we're going to load horses. So where do we start?
So you're going to start with the loading order, which hopefully you've already established when you set up your evacuation plan. You know who's going to load first, you know who's going into what slot, and who can and can't go together. If you have goats and chickens and everything else, you know where they're going to be going and how you're going to get them out. You're not making any of those decisions right now. It's going to be extra chaotic if you're standing there and you've got 3 horses in your hands and trying to figure out who's going where and why and discussing it. It needs to be predetermined. The goal is to get on the road to your predetermined evacuation destination as quickly and as safely as you can.
And a natural disaster, were you on evacuation warning, or maybe earlier, just on a watch? If you evacuate under those conditions, you may have the time and ability to return to your facility to pick up additional loads of horses, or, if you're unable to get them all at once.
Yeah, so again, that really speaks to not waiting, right? And just making that decision to go early. So, so what we've been discussing already is really a perfect scenario, right? Where you're home, you get adequate warning, you work your plan, and you end up staying at a predetermined location of your choosing, right? But I think, we've hinted at the fact that that's may not be actually how it works out. So maybe you're not at home, right? When the evacuation warning comes, or worse yet, is, you're told you have to leave now. There's no leave if you want to kind of thing. And maybe you don't own a truck and trailer, right? You haven't been able to find a buddy who can come early and get you out. So, Jill, you connect with a lot of people in these situations. You've kind of touched on that already, but with your work through the 9/11 Farm and Ranch Evacuation Community Group in Colorado, how might things unfold for these kinds of situations? How, if it's not this perfect, I just load up, 2 days ahead of time and leave kind of thing.
Yep. So as soon as we have there's 5 admins in our group, and we have all of the counties in Colorado on Watch Duty app. The notifications are turned on for every county. So a fire starts anywhere, and we will send it in our private chat so that you can share the fire, and we will share that, and then we will turn the notifications on for that incident. So as soon as evacuations start going, we're going to get notification. And as soon as we see that there is a livestock shelter opened up, then we will put a post up publicly that's going to show that this fire is in place and that evacuations are already in order. Anyone who needs help evacuating their animals at that point can put a post on on our page. They're the only posts that are allowed on our page besides our own. So we require them to put up how many animals they have, their address, their phone number, and then any of our 6,000 members can start offering help under that post. We will check out our map and see who else is in that area. We can contact them if they're large facilities. We'll send them a text and say, do you guys need help? Do you need us to send trailers? And then we'll stay in text communication with that person that needing evac to make sure that they've connected with someone to help them get out.
And I think one of the strengths we've really had, like Jill, you're saying what you have in Colorado, we in Sonoma County now have a cart. And what you see is that, it streamlines who can be evacuated. I think one of the things people really want to do to help is go on a Facebook page and take a screenshot of that, and then they share it on their page and they think they're helping, but it really creates what I call like the 27 thoroughbreds phenomenon. We've all seen, if you're a horse person, 27 thoroughbreds in need of help, or the 56 thoroughbreds, they're all going to die. And that's what happened at Cloverleaf Ranch here. Cloverleaf was probably the most significant ranch impacted, and that they did not have time to evacuate. They were right there by the Kmart where the fire was moving so fast it went across the freeway, and they got their horses in the indoor arena and they left. And so people who were boarding there were starting to post on Facebook and say, I need somebody to go get my horse. But we didn't have any way to communicate. Was the fire department going to open the road? Who was going to go? And so people were just getting their trailers and they would just go wait. And, then eventually I got to go do something else. And for Tubbs fire went on for 2 weeks. We were evacuating animals. The fire continued for 2 weeks. And over that 2 weeks, you'd see somebody needs to go get the horses at Cloverleaf. And people would be like, no horses at Cloverleaf, they're gone. But, it really doesn't help the communication when you're trying to then send people back to right. Something that's already been evacuated.
Yeah, for sure. And so you've worked not so much in the Tubbs fire, but subsequent fires that you've talked about that you have helped people evacuate, like you talked about coming back from Fresno and helping people. So, if you're in that situation, as a horse owner, you don't own your own truck and trailer, you're reliant on somebody coming to get you, you're waiting for evacuation, and some generous soul like yourself, shows up to help me evacuate my horses. What's that like as a volunteer? Doing that?
Yeah, it's one of those things that I think nobody really thought about what the consequences are going to be. You just jump in and you help. The animals need help. But I think the one that sticks the most with me during Tubbs, I went with one of my students and her boyfriend to go get some horses up in Healdsburg, and we went up this really narrow ranch road, and we get into there, and there's just absolutely nowhere that we are going to turn around. There's a huge tree on the side of a cliff. And fortunately, they're both grew up on cattle ranches in really, seaside towns. And they managed to, kind of Austin Powers turn the trailer around, this enormous gooseneck. And we got turned around. And then we went up this hill that had these really slick concrete sidewalk. I don't really understand what it was. And we get up to the barn, and the guy who'd come with us, who knew the horses and where the property was, he's like, we're going to need a lunch whip to catch these horses. So, right off the bat, you're like, well, this is not going to be a great situation. So we end up catching these horses, first 2 load. And the last one is just, he's not going to get in the trailer. And we tried butt roping. We tried, everything we could do. I actually think we tried to load that horse first and then thought, okay, well, if we put the friends in, it's great big open cattle, he'll jump in, it'll be fine. And he rears, he flips over, he's got, like he hit a nerve and his leg is a little stingy. And at that point, we just decided it wasn't safe for us. We could see the fire and we had to go. And, that really sticks with you, right? Like, we have to leave somebody's horse. We don't know what condition this horse is in. We don't know we still don't know, right? We don't know if that horse made it out. And so I think really making it as easy as possible for people, not just in terms of handling your horse, but also, make sure you have a place where somebody who doesn't know your property could turn around. Make sure that your horses are catchable. And I do think, one of the things we don't think about, I was listening to your last episode, you're talking about biosecurity. Many of these horses who are left behind, they're not training horses. They're not, the people who have the means generally can evacuate themselves. These are either horses who were left because they didn't have time to get out, or they were left because the people didn't have the means to get them out. And these are horses that, we had abuse cases coming into the fairgrounds that were evacuated, that were starvation and, just hadn't been handled. So I think both, if you're going to go into this as an evacuation situation, knowing that this is not going to be the nice horses at your boarding facility necessarily, but also as an owner, know you really have to do the best you can to help, just 3 random people who showed up at your place to help do the best they can for you and your animals.
Yeah, and I know in talking to you not long after the event, Jill sort of briefly touched to mention PTSD, but it really affected you. I know from talking to you personally for many, many months.
Yeah, both, your home is on fire. You're seeing horses come in that are burned and are on IV. People are homeless. They've lost their houses. Their horses have lost their houses. There was this great resilient spirit, I think, within the barns of the people who had lost their houses and their horses, in their horses' houses, building community and barbecuing together and all of that, people really kind of bonded together. But yeah, it was not an easy thing to get through and then deal with, right? It's that one horse, right? Did we break the horse? And you almost don't want to talk about it, right? Because then you think, like, what's my liability for this? And I just wanted to help. And did I make it worse?
Right, for sure. It's a heavy load to carry. Jill, you and I talked earlier, and Amy just touched there on being able to get into people's properties, and you shared a story of evacuating from a hurricane when you lived on the East Coast, and the fact that the only way you were able to get out was because you owned a chainsaw.
True. Yeah. So we had, I had 3 different directions I could go, and we went the first way, and there was trees down, second way, trees down, third way, trees down. We walked back to the house. We got the chainsaw. Not everybody has a chainsaw. Not everybody's comfortable with a chainsaw. We do a lot of off-roading, so we're very used to cutting down timber. And we had to clear the road, and it was the same for all of our other neighbors that were trying to get out. They didn't have chainsaws either. So that is, if you are, I'm not saying everybody should be traveling around with a chainsaw, but these are the things we don't think about, right? We didn't think about it. We started driving and we came across it, and then we walked back to get the chainsaw. But that is a reality. The roads could be blocked, whether it's flooding, a hurricane, fire, the trees go down. Your route may get blocked really quickly. It might not even be that there's flooding on it or that there's fire on it. The trees might, usually it's a pretty good wind event when these things happen. So there are, that's a real possibility.
Yeah, we didn't say that last time as part of our preparedness, which is why I wanted to mention it now, because I do think, thinking about if you own a chainsaw, having it in a handy location is a good thing to have. And Amy, to your point, people really helping volunteers by, if you don't own a truck and trailer, you often don't think about how you get on your property with a truck and trailer, right? You mentioned that, you could have actually got onto that property more easily if the trees had just been trimmed. But if you're just driving your Prius home every day or whatever, like you don't think about the fact that you need X foot of tree clearance to get your truck and trailer in, right? And so it doesn't cross your mind because that's not your reality. And like gates too, right? Getting into property with gates. I know, Jill, in Colorado, you put great big gates on your property.
Yeah, I had 16-foot gates so I could drive in and out of all of them. But again, if you just have a car and you don't own a truck or trailer, you might just have a really small gate that your car can go in and out of. And, if somebody comes in with a big trailer with a big truck, they may not be able to fit through that gate.
Yeah. So and things you just I wouldn't have thought about, right? Because I just haven't had to do this the way that you two have. So
when I think to your point of not thinking about, these things you don't think about when you don't have your own truck and trailer, I think a lot of people, who don't have a truck and trailer think like, oh, I don't have any way to practice with my horse of loading and unloading. And, a lot of people that I've helped with trailer loading, a lot of it starts with leading your horse, right? If you're leading your horse and he's dragging behind you, or you're leading your horse and he's dragging you, there are a lot of things you can work on at home of getting your horse to move around you and to respect you on the lead rope and to walk, with you and understand that moving with you is important, so that if you don't have the opportunity to practice getting into a trailer, you at least have some of the moving parts to get that horse in a trailer. And these are things you can work on every day versus, on Saturday, I hook the trailer up or I get my friend with the trailer to come over. So I think there are some things, just to think about working at home in general.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, and even things like, can you build a step that they have to step onto with railroad ties or something, right? So that you can simulate that step up trailer type of thing, like all that kind of thing, stepping onto floors that are unusual, stepping onto tarps, like all that kind of stuff is so valuable to your point. So what if we're running out of time, right? And you can't get your horses loaded?
Yeah. So if you can't get the horses loaded, you have to make a hard call. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. Some people choose to open the gates and, they let the horses loose. It depends on what your disaster you're facing. I mean, I live in hurricane. Well, I've lived in hurricane, but I've also, right now I'm in tornado country, and that's always the big debate. Do you put them in the barn and maybe the tornado goes over you and the barn falls on them? Or do you put them outside and the possibility of flying trees or debris, ends up hitting them? But whatever you do, if you have to leave your horses, you want to have some way to put your contact information on the horse's body, whether that's permanent marker on their hooves, spray paint, grease stick on their body. There's also, again, I said this last time, there's lots of braid-in name tags, identification tags that are on the market now that you can get. A lot of people in Colorado put those in at the beginning of the summer, and they just stay in all summer. So that's something else that's available.
Yeah, for sure. So that really brings us to the identification part, so that you can reconnect with your animals that we talked about last episode, right? It's having your documentation and identification in order. We also talked last time about other things to bring with you if you have time to grab them. So as a quick recap, like what would that be?
Ideally, your go bag, which is already packed and is either sitting inside your trailer tack room or it's just inside the barn door, so you can just grab it without thinking. That bag's going to have the copies of your horse's documentation, medications, emergency first aid supplies. Your extra lead ropes and halters will probably already be in your trailer if you're taking your own trailer. Important papers, changes of clothes. These are all the things that you want to have in place as part of your plan.
And feed, right? Ideally, you're going to have a couple of bales of hay and hopefully enough water to at least get you through the immediate future.
Yeah, the reality is when you go to the fairgrounds, they probably haven't had animals there for months. So there's not going to be any feed there. You're going to have to wait for the local feed stores to get money for donations for somebody to make the plan. So, if you have horses whose people had to leave without them or things were on fire when they left, they didn't stop and get hay. They didn't get medication. Fortunately, the fairgrounds typically have water, so you're pretty set there. But, if you can bring your own feed, you're in a much better situation. I've been actually recently thinking my mare has PSSM. And so, often we bring grass hay into the fairgrounds because it's safer for everybody because they're a little more colic risky. But for my mare, grass hay can be kind of a difficult feed for her. So these are things you have to think about.
And depending on the area that you live in, if you're in a flood risk area, you might want to have a dry bag as your go bag because soak supplies, that's a reality that it might happen. So that's something to think about too when you decide to start packing this.
That's a really good point. So what do you leave behind?
Pretty much everything that isn't alive. And I mean, when you're there, you kind of know that, it's when you're like logically thinking about it, you're like, oh, my saddle would cost thousands to replace. And I don't want to just, take your animals and go. If you have time, and you're leaving home, the things you're going to care about, it's probably your photo albums, right? It's your pictures or your documents. But if you don't have any time, everything else is replaceable. It's your horse is not, you're not. And really, I think a lot of people want to stay behind and save their animals, but honestly, getting out is the best thing you can do for the fire department. If they have to focus on people rescue, that's going to really deter from fire stopping.
That's a good point. Yeah, they're trying hard to put the fire out, not have to rescue people. That's a really important point. So, okay, so now you're on the road. What are some things to think about?
So drive calm. It's going to be really hard to think about that because until you've done this, like your adrenaline is going to be pumping. So, before you get in the driver's seat, take a deep breath, really, try to ground yourself a little bit, do some box breathing, whatever it is. It's going to be a rough ride, right? So you need to really think about driving smart, not driving aggressively. Everybody wants to get out. The traffic is going to be really rough. Like I said, we're going to open the lanes are all going to be going the same way, but it's going to be very slow and it's going to be stressful. So really think about your horses in the back. They're already stressed. You're stressed. Everybody around you is stressed. So really, try your best to stay calm and drive smart.
Another reason to get out early, right? To try and avoid all of that chaos because the roads are going to be really chaotic. And if you've waited until the event is upon you, so to speak, oftentimes like the visibility is really poor.
Right. Yep. That's true. Expect it to be, just really congested. Expect emergency vehicles to be coming in the opposite direction. So even if the roads are open so that all the traffic's going one direction, you still are going to have emergency vehicles coming through the other way. If more trucks have been called in, if you've pre-driven your evacuation routes, your alternate roads, if those are still open, that might be an option too. And the other thing I will say is that you may have people walking livestock down the road with you, between trailers, between cars. When Estes Park got evacuated, we couldn't get trailers in there. So there was a staging area and everybody had to walk the horses out to that staging area to get on the trailers.
Yeah, I was going to just say that too. You may have people walking, you may have animals walking, you may have other people who chose to turn their animals loose. You may have loose animals on the road as well. I mean, it really is just chaos. And tubs, people were getting on the freeway on ramps going the wrong direction, but they hadn't managed to get traffic stopped further up the road yet because nobody knew what was happening.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, that would be terrifying. Yeah, that's a lot to decompress after the fact for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing what you can do in the moment, but like after the fact, it's got to be like amazing to kind of process all of that. So, knowing, Jill, you mentioned knowing your alternate routes. I mean, Amy, I think you mentioned at one point that one of the fires you were associated with, you were all evacuating, and then where you were evacuating to got evacuated, right? So having secondary plans, right?
That's what happened in the Kincaid fire. And that was part of the reason why traffic was so bad. As I was coming back, they had decided they may have to evacuate Sonoma County Fairgrounds. So they had evacuated all these horses there. And then they were telling everybody who was evacuating, go to Alameda County, go to the fairgrounds. So then it was, do we have to evacuate where we evacuated to? And, it's like your boarding barn, right? You go to your boarding barn, you look around, you're like, there's 40 horses here, there's 6 trailers. The evacuation grounds is even worse, right? Because the majority of those horses or goats or sheep have come in on somebody else's trailer.
Yeah, and I think it's also really important to say, like, when you're thinking about this and you're thinking about the planning, you're only thinking about you. Maybe you're thinking about your boarding barn. I mean, when it was, I don't remember if it was the Cameron fire, the Marshall fire, like we did 360 horses in a day. Like like, I don't think you understand the magnitude. When you get to that fairground, you're once again waiting. You're not just going to get there and get your horse off. Everybody else is trying to get their horses off. Like, it's really, I just can't say it enough. Like, until you go through this, it's just very stressful and it's very chaotic for everybody. And again, you may go to one, like your fairgrounds may be open and it might be full. And so you get there and then they turn you away and they say this secondary place open and then back at the road with everybody else, right? So, have patience, give everybody a little bit of grace, take a deep breath, because it definitely, the magnitude of the whole situation is overwhelming.
And I think that really speaks to finding somebody in your community that you can partner and collaborate with. You really, if you don't have to go to the fairgrounds, don't want to go to the fairgrounds. I think that is one of our biggest changes over the last couple of fires is we're seeing less horses come to the fairgrounds because you don't want to be there. That it's chaotic. It's, that should really be we didn't have any other options location, and everybody who can should go somewhere else. I think is truly the best option. It's less stressful for your horses. It's less stressful for you. And it really goes to that two scenarios, right? If you are evacuating and we have to go right now, the fairgrounds may be your best option. But, or if your horses had to be evacuated, the fairgrounds is a great, central meeting location. But
so go ahead.
I would say, but it's just easier not to go there. You've got every animal in the county, has showed up with voluntary care, essentially.
For sure. So let's skip to talking about that, right? So go back to, you've made it to, the evacuation facility. Maybe you've ended up at the fairgrounds, right? So what's that going to look like? Now what, right? How does that go? How does that work?
In general, I think now with the cart, it's a lot more organized. We have volunteers who are trained. They know their jobs. We have people who do dispatch. We have people who do, feeding. We rely much less on the community at large showing up. But if your community has not made a plan, it will be chaos. You will have everybody who ever wanted to pet an animal think that they can, this is their moment to help. You may have people who are not trained, in caring for horses, and you're going to wait for supplies.
So if you're at the fairgrounds or a large evacuation facility, at the beginning of one of these things, what is that environment like? I mean, you mentioned one of your fairgrounds has racehorse stables, but I also know from conversations with you that that's not how they all are. So what is that environment? What can we expect when we roll into that kind of facility?
Yeah, so Sonoma County Fairgrounds has a racetrack. So we do have race stables there, which, definitely makes it easier. We have, you may have herds of cattle turned out in the arenas. At our more southern fairgrounds, they don't have a horse facility. So we, build pens in the dairy cattle show barns and put some pipe panels up. And it's generally chaotic. You've got horses who may have never been stalled before. You've got cattle who are now in small confined areas. And you've got everybody, with their goats shoved in the back of their Prius, just showed up looking for a home.
They come in, people, I guess that makes sense. So you just put your goat in whatever you have. Yeah. I mean,
you're not going to waste time with the dog crates and putting the goat in with things that are on fire. It's, so, yeah. And there is something about the goat people. They got Priuses, they got Subarus, they just load those goats like dogs.
And I just want to add, right now I'm currently monitoring the Aspen Acres fire in Colorado. And just for perspective, there's 1,000 animals right now at the fairgrounds. Wow. And one thing we have noticed, and we haven't come across this before, is livestock guardian dogs. If you have a livestock guardian dog, you need to make special plans for them. The fairground in Colorado won't take them. They can't go in stalls. And most of the time, they're not easy to bring into a building because that is not what they do. And they will try to go back to their property. So, I don't personally know, like, this is a new one for us. We don't have any type of feedback from people yet about how they're handling that. But we were really surprised that they were turned away from the fairgrounds. So that is something to think about. If you're bringing your livestock guardian dogs, you're going to need to find somewhere for them to go if your fairgrounds won't take them. So do be prepared for that, and what that looks like.
Yeah, that's a good point. So once you've got your horse kind of settled in, like once you've arrived, you've unloaded, you found a stall, you've kind of got yourself set up with, water and basic things, what's the next thing you're going to be looked to be doing, Jill?
Yeah, so, give them a minute, put them in the stall,
Right.
Give them a minute to take a deep breath.
Take a deep breath yourself, right?
Take a deep breath yourself, right? Like, check in on yourself. But you want to look them over, just see if there's any obvious injuries, depending on what you were evacuating from, whether they have burns, whether, if you've brought them out of a flood area, if they've got any cuts, things like that. It's smart to take your vital signs, heart rate, respiratory rate, your temperature, which means that you, one, need to have this equipment, but you also need to have a baseline. So hopefully you've done this on your horse at home when they're in a resting state. Colic is a real risk for evacuated horses. And if they do have burns, if they have cuts, skin issues, infections obviously are going to be a concern. You're going to want to continue to monitor their vitals. There may not be a vet available. One will probably get there eventually, depending on, what the situation is. But if it's something, you're going to have to assess some of this stuff by yourself until a vet gets there.
Yeah, we were, there's so many points about Tubbs Fire where I just say we were lucky. At Tubbs, we were really lucky that one of our local veterinarians just canceled all of our clients for the day and just went to the fairgrounds and waited. So she was there when horses came in, people would, report out, here's what we've got. And she would go see them. And she's ultimately who set up the cart in Sonoma County. So when there is a fire, her clients know she's, whatever your routine appointment for the day will not be happening. She will be at the fairgrounds. Other things, we're lucky. We're close to UC Davis, right? So Dr. Madigan and his response team showed up, brought a bunch of veterinary students with them. We have a cart in Napa County. They came with, small and large animal veterinarians. I think we're just lucky, we're close to Davis. So a lot of people show up who want to help. But if you are in a pretty rural community, it may take you a while to get a vet there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So having those supplies in your trailer and knowing how to use them, which means perhaps having a conversation with your vet about even just, basic wound care, what to do in these situations. If you've got things like, you've got various medications that your vet might recommend you give in a colic situation or what have you, understanding how to use them ahead of time is really important. So, okay, so let's talk about volunteers and the community, because Jill and I touched on the importance of this in our last episode. Amy, what are some of the roles that volunteers tend to be needed for? You mentioned that everyone's going to show up wanting to pet an animal, right? But there are actually some really important roles that volunteers can do, even if you have no livestock experience and you want to help. There are things that you can do.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really materializes quickly, right, is a feeding schedule. You need somebody, morning and night who's going to feed. You need somebody probably to go through and fill water buckets, right? Our racehorse stables do not have automatic waters, but we have a large amount of buckets and hoses, right? So, somebody who's going to stand there for the 10 minutes or so it takes to fill all these water buckets and then go through every day. People, you have people who run through and do morning vital checks or morning wellness checks and evening wellness checks. If you're not an animal person, and you have organizational skills, you may be the person who's checking people in and saying they had this many animals. where did these animals come from? Are they your animals, or were you dispatched to get these animals? Do you know who dispatched you to get these animals? You may be the person trying to connect these animals back to their people. And then, there's a dispatching role and then the people who are actually out going to get animals.
Yeah, there's also the under-discussed side of volunteerism in animal emergencies, and that's the people that show up with the best intentions and make everything significantly worse, right? And I think that, we never want to discourage anybody from volunteering. Obviously, all hands on deck in these situations, but you need to be willing to say, I don't know, and taking direction from people that do know. And I'm going to just give an example of this because I think it's a really important thing that we haven't discussed. This happened, I think, 2 years ago. Somebody volunteered to go pick up horses. They had a horse trailer. They hadn't used it in how many years? And they picked up the horses and they loaded them and the floor went out. And the horses ended up having to go to the hospital. It was terrible, right? Like, the whole situation was terrible. And this is what I mean. Like, the person had the best intentions of helping, but it's really important that, if you're going to go pick up horses, your trailer needs to be in tip-top shape. Like, this is not the time to just go do it because you want to be helpful. Volunteer somewhere else and do something else. And the other volunteers that are wonderful are the monetary volunteers, right? Like, that's a huge thing too, is just making a donation. If you can't physically go out there, or you do not want to handle hyped up horses that are very stressed out, a monetary donation towards hay and feed is also, a wonderful way to volunteer. The other thing I want to mention is Fleet of Angels, which is a nonprofit organization. They help horse owners and small rescues when they need urgent assistance after being devastated by a natural disaster or any other major emergency. In 2025 alone, they distributed 172 emergency grants, 101 emergency hay grants, and they provided over 1 million horse meals, 51 post-disaster veterinary grants, and provided support for over 1,000 horses through services such as evacuation, emergency stabling, and home placement. They provide support across the U.S. and internationally. So if you do find yourself in this situation, certainly take a look at that if you need any type of assistance for long-term evacuation. And also, if you're ever looking for somewhere to donate, they do have a donation option, and it is a wonderful organization. So I think it's really important that we mention them.
And I think a good point is the monetary donation. They say the second emergency is the supplies, or the second disaster is the supply. You have people showing up who are like, I thought somebody would need these bridles I've never used, or I brought buckets. And then, you get to the end of the first day and you're like, we have 500 buckets and not enough hay. So I think really don't show up and bring things, donate the money to the feed stores, to the farm supply, and let the people running the emergency grounds make the orders of what they need.
Yeah. When the Tubbs fire occurred, it sounded like, from what you've shared with us, that things were pretty chaotic. How have things in Sonoma County, as a result of that fire and the other fires, like, how have they changed? Are you guys better at it now? I hate to say that you have to get better, but are you guys better about it?
Yeah, you've talked quite a bit about the Watch Duty app, and the Watch Duty app came out of Santa Rosa and during the fires, because of the fires. So, I think just that tool has really helped people because, we're all anxious. So like you said, watching wind patterns, it gives you rate of speed. I also think it helps with your anxiety, right? You're like, oh, it's a slow rate of speed and the wind isn't blowing. I can continue shopping at Target. So I think, that much more, information. We do have, a CART, and they train every year. And so we have people who are just ready to go. People know what their jobs are. Animal Services is involved in that. They're activated through the Office of Emergency Services. So they really have a legitimate role in our community. Not saying that if you want to go help your friends, it's not legitimate, but they have access to the sheriff to go behind fire lines. They have the training to do it. They have dispatch training. I think too, we know things now, like don't take all the buckets to the fairgrounds, donate the money. People are more prepared. My boarding, the owner of my boarding barn, she sent us a lot of flyer that's like, we have to evacuate. Where do you want your horse to go? Who are we calling? Who's your veterinarian?
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, we actually have, and then, it's funny because it spills over, right? My sister boards in Salinas. Her barn owner was like, tell your sister I want everything they've done so that we're ready. So I do think, we are much more prepared. Now, that being said, and I don't want to jinx anything, we haven't had a large level. I mean, it's funny, right? Your scales are different. Our last big fire was either the glass fire or Walbridge in 2020, where we really had to evacuate. We had kind of a minor fire last year. And I think like minor fire now is like 5,000 acres. So, you worry a little about our sense of preparedness. And I will say too, we have Sonoma County Horse Council, and they, host trainings for how to back up your trailer, how to maneuver around obstacles. And they have really supported the cart that's here. And I really think it gives much more control over who can show up and volunteer. You want to show up and volunteer in evacuation, you have to go to this training. And then if you do show up, your job is things like filling water buckets. It's not
glamorous.
Yeah, it's not glamorous. You're not, maybe you get to pet some horse noses while you're doing it, but it's not, you're in the middle of things, right? So I think it's given a lot more control over who's involved, and has created a lot more safety, like Jill was saying, right? We don't have people who are showing up and the floor of the trailer shows up. These are people who are training every year in order to be ready for this.
Yeah, if you can get into cart training, like if you have, I know not everywhere has cart teams. If there's a team near you and you can get some training, I highly recommend it. I mean, you don't have to be part of their team. They do offer separate training. I know that they will do some private, for private organizations, they'll do training for that. And I also wanted to say, and I said this in the last episode, you can contact your local fire department. They will come to your barn. They will have a talk with you, with your boarders. They'll walk around the barn. They'll see, talk to you about the defensible space, what things you need to clean up. Do you need to, do you have a bunch of trees? Do you need to cut the low branches? Like in Colorado, they were giving property owners credit. I think it was $200 to clean up the defensible space around their properties. So, your local fire department, even if they're not a wildland fire department, can certainly come and help you in your barn and do some training with you. And if you're a neighbor with good intentions but no training, and your power is logistics, it's communications, it's supporting the owners, not handling the animals. That's all great, right? Like all those people are needed. And when, I'm in Iowa, I am not a hands-on or boots on the ground person, right? But I'm great on the computer and I work on the computer all day. So everything I do logistically is still helpful, but I'm never actually in the fire unless I'm evacuating. I'm never actually, which I've done.
Yeah.
But everybody has a place. There's a place for everybody. So if you want to help, it is out there, but just get the right training and reach out and find out what type of things are available in your area.
Feed the volunteers. Volunteers need to eat.
Yes.
Gatorade, Powerade.
Providing bottled water, going and getting bottled water or whatever. It can be that simple and you will make somebody's day.
Yeah.
Right? You'll make a huge difference.
With pizza, right? I mean, one of my shining light moments was, we've been at the fairgrounds for 48 hours on that first fire. And one of my students showed up and shoved Carl's Jr. through the chain link fence. And we passed the soda through, and Dr. Amber Bowen was my vet at the time. We were taking bites of the sandwich and passing it back and forth and taking a sip of the soda. And it was this one moment of normalcy where we could have food, and yeah, we think so much about the animals. You're not thinking about yourself. So it really is, finding your strengths. Don't try to put yourself somewhere where you're going to struggle. Everybody, needs to be really, really on top of things. And, for me, like you said, Claire, like I felt like I had so much PTSD that I have really just reserved my energy for people I know who need help. And, like I said, my parents are elderly and they often have to evacuate. So if I have to go get somebody's horse, I'll go get somebody's horse, but it's probably better off for me to be at home with my family.
Yeah, that's fair. And you can do things for your community in so many different ways. So before we wrap this up, I mean, if you could be at these evacuation facilities for some time, and you mentioned that the Tubbs fire went on for like 2 weeks. I think the Aspen fire has been going on for quite a while now, right? And still people are being evacuated. These things take a long time. You may not be able to go home for quite a long time. So, Amy, what's it like being in these facilities? What's it like, being there for a while? Like, what are some things for people to keep in mind?
Yeah, I think that's one of the hardest parts is, we talk about the evacuation and getting there, but sometimes the fire ends and you have to stay. And, I think it's people want to be able to go back to normal life. If you're a barrel racer, you want to be able to train. But a lot of times the liability means you're just best hand walking and, checking in on what's happening. You may just want to spend your time checking in on what's happening at home and, spend some time with your animals.
Yeah, and from an animal. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, so it may not be, you may not be riding, even though you're there for quite a long time.
Yeah, and you probably shouldn't be either, right? The air quality is so bad, both for you and the animals. It really is just a time to kind of sit tight and do as little as possible.
Yeah.
I think it's really important too that you continue to monitor your horses, right? Like if this has been going on for days, weeks, whatever the case may be, and you have volunteers watching your horse, like that's not the same as being at a boarding facility with somebody that's looking at colic, that like knows horses and knows what to watch for. If you still have to go to work and you're only checking in once a day, you need to be just making sure that you're really looking them over and, still checking those vitals, making sure that they're eating, making sure they're drinking. Is there unusual sweat? Are they pawing? All those types of things, like you're going to want to continue to monitor that.
We've really only scratched the surface here on what may occur and what to be prepared for. Amy, is there anything you think we've forgotten that you think we should discuss before we go?
I think just, to consider that if you are in an evacuation, it's not like the evacuation ends and you just recover, right? I mean, it may take, you and your animals weeks and months, even if you weren't evacuated, right? I think really sitting with the emotional toll of what this takes on you. I think, we don't think about that so much. We just think we'll go back to life. And that's certainly not what happens. I also think, there are just so many great models of this, whether it's the cart or not, that of how this works in a system, how these systems work across our state. And that if you are, not, your area is not prepared, that, starting to look at what is happening around you, who has these trainings so that you are ready. I think above all, it's don't think this can't happen to you. Lake County, our neighboring county, had fires for decades. And we were like, oh no, that's so terrible. It happens over there. It could never happen to us. And it has. We had 4 fires in 5 years, 2 in 1 year.
Yeah, for sure. And I think just because these things don't exist, I think what I've heard from both of you is, yes, there are these, government organizations and affiliated groups like CART or what have you. But the bottom line is grassroots organizations can make a huge difference, right?
Yeah.
Like you can be the one that initiates this for your community.
Yes. And above all, take responsibility for yourself. Don't expect that somebody's going to come save you. Make your own plan.
For our listeners, if you'd like to be a part of our conversation, please send your suggestions for future topics and equine nutrition questions to info@scoopandscale.com and is spelled out. You can also find Claire at clarityequine.com.
We know that if you're like us, you're probably listening to this while driving or doing barn chores. But when your hands are free, if you'd share it with your friends on social media and be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, it helps other horse lovers like you to find us.
For the Scoop and Scale podcast, I'm Jill Jackson.
And I'm Dr. Claire Tunis.
Thanks for riding along with us.